We've now got our two fields put together, so we're now going to start to pivot our attention to handling submission of this form. Remember, at some point in time, the user is going to want to click a button to actually create a stream or do whatever it is the form is supposed to do. We're going to first begin by approaching this problem in the same way that we have handled form submission in the past, and then we're going to very quickly refactor it to use Redux form as well. So I'm going to put together a little helper method inside of my class called onSubmit. And remember, anytime that this thing gets called, it will be called with an event object. Usually, we want to call something like event.preventDefault on that object to keep it from attempting to refresh the browser as the browser tries to submit the form to some backend server that doesn't actually exist in this case. So again, this is what we usually do. But now that we are using Redux form, things are going to be just a little bit different. So, as a quick reminder, just a little bit ago, we did a console log inside of our render method of this.props. I'm going to type that out again, and I'm going to save this, and we're going to take a look at that props object really quickly one more time. So back inside my browser, here's my props object, and as before, we see that there are a tremendous number of methods, or excuse me, properties added to that props object, all by Redux form. If you look inside of here, you're going to see that there's one particular property right here called handleSubmit. So this is a function that we are supposed to call any time that the form gets submitted. This function is provided by Redux form. You'll see what it does in just a moment. It's a lot easier to just kind of show you what this does rather than give you a kind of unclear definition. So let's just write out some code here and you'll very quickly understand what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to delete the console log. I'm then going to find the form element right here, and I'm going to add on the onSubmit prop like so. Now here's where things get interesting. To onSubmit, usually we would pass in onSubmit, our callback right here, but now that we are using Redux form, things are going to be just a bit different. So to onSubmit, I'm going to pass this.props.handleSubmit, and then into that, I'm going to pass my this.onSubmit function, like so. So a lot of very similar terminology going on right here. Let's just very quickly go over that block. So we have onSubmit. That is the name of the prop that we are passing down to the form. If we pass a function called, or excuse me, if we pass a function on the onSubmit prop down into the form, the function will be called anytime that the form gets submitted. Then inside of here, we first have this.props.handleSubmit. This is a callback function that is provided to our component by Redux form. We then call that function with our callback method that we defined inside of our component right here. And when we go through this entire process, it's going to change exactly how onSubmit gets called. Internally, whenever this form gets submitted now, handleSubmit is going to automatically receive that event object and automatically call preventDefault for us. That is something that's really tedious for us to have to do, so Redux form just takes care of it for us. So we don't have to call that anymore. In fact, onSubmit is not even going to be called with an event object at all. Instead, it's going to be called with whatever values existed inside of our two field inputs. So usually we might refer to this argument right here as something like form props. Now, form props does not mean that this is some data passed down by a parent component. Maybe a better name for this argument here would be something like, say, form values. Let's stick with that right now just to make things a little bit more clear. So let's console log out those form values, and you'll very quickly get a good idea of what's going on here. Now, last thing I want to do very quickly, inside the form, I'm going to put in a button with the class name of UI button primary. And I'll give this thing some text like submit. All right, let's flip back over and we'll test it out really quickly. So I'll enter in some title and some description. And then when I click on submit, there's my console log. So I've got the title and the description that were entered into the form. No longer are we dealing with some event object as our argument right here. The event object is really not useful to us one bit. The only reason we ever dealt with the event object was so that we could call that preventDefault method. So now this onSubmit callback, rather than getting the useless event object, is going to be called with all the values out of our form inside of an object. And so that's going to make it really easy for us to take those form values now and save them on some API or validate or whatever it is we want to do with them. All right, so that's pretty much it on how we handle form submission with Redux form. Again, we reference handleSubmit, and then we pass in whatever callback we want to run after the form gets submitted. So in reality, handleSubmit is going to be called, and then once it processes the form event and all that kind of good stuff, our callback then gets invoked with our actual form values that you and I care about. All right, so this looks pretty good. Now, one little thing I want to point out here, if I refresh the browser and I just click on submit right away, I will get my submission event, even though I did not enter a title and a description. So chances are that you and I do not want people to be able to create a stream that does not have a title and a description. So I think that before we allow a user to submit this form, we should really be validating these text inputs. So let's take a pause right here. When we come back to the next section, we're going to learn how we can validate some text inputs with Redux form.